from the depth instant tutorial.
This is Instant Tutorials, and today we're going to do a new general tutorial about APS. APS and advanced cannons are the exact same things, if you didn't know that. It is called APS because previously it was also called Advanced Projectile System. When starting to work with advanced cannons, the task may seem daunting, but it actually isn't that complex. Many of the components you see right here in front of you are actually completely useless, and I'm only gonna show you what you need to learn to be able to build with these things. For example, the ammo controller parts down here are built in, so you don't have to use this. I like to use them so that I can save a particular shell when I save a turret, for example. But if you're making a turret and setting up a shell, well, you can just set it up inside of the APS settings. The ammo controller and modules are actually not needed anymore. As for the other pieces, we have the advanced firing piece. The advanced firing piece is of course the main firing chamber. That's what fires the shot. That's what loads in the shell and fires it. This is the most important block for an APS cannon and is the block that is required for all APS cannons. Then we have mantlets. Mantlets are optional, but usually good to have so that you can have your barrel aiming at different directions. Then we have barrels, and the barrels can be attached directly to a firing piece, but it's good to connect them via a mantle for said reason. Gauge increasers are used to make the caliber of the gun to be able to be larger. Cooling units, they make the gun cooler, and not cooler in a way that's super cool, but cooler in a way that it doesn't overheat. If it's not cool enough, it won't fire. The cooling units, however, come in straight pipe, weird shapes. Who cares? The only one you need to use is the Gauge Cooler 5-way. It has no drawbacks of using only that one. The other cooling, you don't care about them, it's completely unnecessary. If you're using 6-way connectors, you probably made something wrong, you don't need them. You can use gauge increasers or cooling units to connect things instead. 6-way connectors are mostly useless. Recoil absorbers help you to make your gun accurate when firing a lot of shots because the recoil makes it less accurate. And if you have these, this won't happen. Autoloaders is a very important block for the APS cannons. On the autoloaders, you can add ammo clips, and the ammo clips on the autoloaders, they will make them reload faster, basically increasing your firing speed. The more autoloaders you have, the faster the gun will shoot. However, autoloaders are pretty expensive, so you can instead put magazines, ammo clips on top of the autoloaders, and that will make the autoloader reload faster. Instead of having a lot of autoloaders, you can decrease the amount by having an ammo clip. The ammo clips doesn't care about how long they are, they only care about how many connections you have per autoloader, and the max you can have is, well, 4. The ammo input feeders, they are put on the ammo clips or the autoloaders to be able to make the gun input ammo to it faster and reload faster. The fall of shot predictor is a pretty useless block. For this tutorial, you don't need to care about it. The laser targeter is really good for some very specific use cases, but it's outside this tutorial. You can also make railguns and rail-assisted cannons. We'll go into that briefly too. To make an ammo, you can just click Q on the ammo controller. You can add a new shell or edit the current shell. And here you can change whatever you want this shell to be about. You can switch out some different parts, and the different parts have different properties. You can then click to assign to all intakes, and that will change the shell. If you're having some shells in the magazine, you can hold Q, click designer mode, click refill, and APS shells. And they are now reloaded to the new type of shell. We're gonna design a very simple APS turret to go through the basics. We're gonna have a 1-axis turret. On that we need a local weapon controller. We can select the all-in-one type and add it behind the turret block. EMP insulation can be used if we have the space. Click Q on this thing and you can see we have some different stats. It's completely useless to shoot at targets you can't shoot at, so this cannon are not able to shoot at things underwater, so I will set it up. The range of this cannon is also probably gonna be below 3000 meters or something like that, depending on how we set it up, so you can limit it to whatever range it effectively works at. If you have multiple mainframes, make sure that you select whatever mainframe it's going to listen to. So the built-in ammo and the ammo controller It's basically the same thing, the only thing is that this one can be seen. And the annoying thing with this thing is that also can be destroyed. However, I will just show you this because we can actually see them. So we're going to create a little shell here. The top of the shell is actually the bottom of the shell. And the bottom here on the list is actually the top or the head of the shell. So for this, we're gonna scroll down to nose. Different types of shells have different types of damage types. Now, we're just going to have a regular kinetic shell for this one. So we're gonna have a heavy head. Down here, we're gonna have some solid warhead bodies. That's basically how to make a proper lead slug. This is going to be a 150 millimeter shell gauge, so I'm going to put that into the stats here. So now we can see the expected muzzle velocity, detection range and stuff like that. What we need to care about is the muzzle velocity. The faster the shell are, the more likely it is to hit the enemy, but it doesn't need to be faster than it needs to be. And it depends a little bit on what shell we use. Kinetic shells generally need to be faster, and chemical shells actually need to be slower, because then you can pack more firepower. If you want to know all about the different words I use and you feel confused, please check my previous dictionary video where I go through all of the common phrases. So, inputting our stats here, we have some important things to look at here. This is a kinetic shell. We are looking at expected kinetic damage. Here we can see 3800. And if we, for example, add another gunpowder casing, you can see that the expected kinetic damage goes up. If I add another one, you can see it goes down. So it is about finding the sweet spot here for the best amount of kinetic damage and also the AP value we want for the shell. If we have a chemical shell, for example, and we don't have a penetrating head, well, the kinetic value here isn't very important at all. If we have a combined shell, it might be important, of course, because that's going to limit your penetration capability. If we have a payload on this shell, for example, we have a high explosive warhead body on this thing, it's going to penetrate a bit into the target and then it's going to detonate. For APS shells, you do not need fuses. Then we have some optional parts we can use if we want to. A base bleeder will increase the damage, but also increase the inaccuracy. The visible tracer increases accuracy of shots when fired in a series. Gravitational ram is weird and usually not used by very many players, and cavitation base can make you shoot at things underwater. For example, the Arcoballista Invictus is using the super cavitation base to be able to shoot at things underwater. Now, we're not going to have any of that, and we're going to rely on our gunpowder thing. If you have some issues with your shell not really fitting into the autoloader, you can decrease the propellant amount here, and that might make it fit. You can see that for this particular shell we have developed, we are requiring a 2 meter autoloader. Clip length required says to you how big of an autoloader you have to fit this shell. And if you play around with these different values, you can see that you can change around some stuff here. This is the ammo we have selected for this gun. Also, we shall look at barrel length for full propellant burn. We need to have at least 5.4 meters, or otherwise we just have too much gunpowder in this cannon. The muzzle velocity will be 850 meters per second for this shell. And if you don't set this little millimeter value here, you will get the wrong stats for your shell. This 150 millimeter stat here doesn't actually matter at all. We actually will need to set that up in the APS cannon. This is just for calculation ease, nothing more than that. And when setting up the shell, you can see that this is what the shell looks like right now. And if you haven't seen my dictionary video yet, well, this is technically a SAPHE shell. Semi-armor penetrating, high explosive, isn't that fun? So, as we already decided what shell we will have, we can start building on our turret here. We already know that we'll need to have autoloaders that are exactly 2 meter or larger. Having larger autoloaders than you need is of course completely wasteful and unnecessary. You don't need to do that. So we're building this turret from the bottom up. we are adding 3 autoloaders in line here, and they can be attached simply. So we're gonna have some ammo clips here, and you may notice that there are clear ammo clips like this, and there are solid ammo clips like this. These solid ammo clips are just to make the game lag a little bit less. Now, an autoloader and an ammo clip can be interchanged with each other. You can, instead of having autoloaders with ammo clips, instead have just autoloaders instead. For this example, we could have had 9 autoloaders, and the reason we are connecting clips to an autoloader is just to save cost. If this was 9 autoloaders instead of 3 autoloaders with 2 clips each, well, it would have the same reload time. So using clips is to save costs. I added an ammo intake for each clip and each autoloader. This is the proper ratio. So if you have some autoloaders with fewer clips and fewer ammo intakes or more or less or stuff like that, the gun will basically shoot uneven after some time and it will be very annoying. Now that we have decided how the turret will look like, we can add our firing piece. The firing piece will not be connected to these automatically. We'll need to use a gauge cooler, and as said before, the gauge 5-way cooler is the thing you need. When adding this on top of here, things are connected, as you can see. In front of the gun, we need a mantlet. Having a mantlet will increase the accuracy of your cannon, even though you may think you don't need one. So having at least an omni mantlet of 1 meter is recommended. This is on a turret block, which means it has side-to-side movements very easily. In this case, it's best to add a elevation mantlet of any kind that may be fitting this particular cannon. In front of the mantlet, we need to have some barrels. Barrels are best used the longer they are, they have more health. There are heavy barrels with slightly more health, but do keep in mind that the heavy barrels will make the gun move slower as well. And if you remember here from the ammo we're going to use, we need a 5.4 meters of minimal barrel length to be able to use full propulsion. One of these is of course 4 meters, so then we'll need to have 5 meters at least. But if we have it longer than that, our accuracy will be greater. The longer barrel, the more accurate cannon. So we have that. For small vehicles, recoil can be very annoying. And if you want to mitigate recoil, you can add any of the muzzle brakes in front of your cannon. Muzzle brakes will make sure that the vehicle isn't being pushed back at all by the shot that it fired. But if you don't need it, don't use it because it adds inaccuracy. As well as the bore activator, it doesn't stack. A bore activator will give you a little bit of a cooling bonus. It's usually a good idea to have for most cannons, and they can be put in front of the cannon too, so that's nice. You may notice that this cannon has a gauge of 60 millimeters. We're going to go into the APS and we're going to set the desired gauge. You can see it doesn't have what we want. We have already decided we're going to do a 150 millimeter gun, so we're gonna write in that. However, as you're seeing here, we don't have that yet. What we need to add is something called gauge increasers. Having a gauge increaser brings it up to 120 millimeters. We will need another one to bring it up to 150 millimeters. Now it will actually be larger than this, the capacity, but we've already set the gauge in the APS piece, so it will only go to 150, even though we are adding more. Now, we will need to go and set up our cannon. So we go into one of the intakes, and you can see ammo controllers on the main construct. We already built the shell and it is on the main construct, so we're going to use that. We can of course add a spherical shell inside of the structure that even can't be destroyed. The annoying part with this type of shell is that this thing can actually be shot off. I use it because I like to have my shells installed on my turret. We're assigning this shell here, and we're going to select Assign to all intakes for this gun. Now it's starting to load a 150mm shell into our gun, which we also can fire. Different calibers have different gun sounds. If you want to watch a video that goes through all of the different calibers sounds, I already made that video. Please check it out and select your favorite gun sound. This gun is very unbalanced. The rate of fire is 7 seconds per shot, 7.7 RPM. as you can see in the stats. But the outloader limit and the ammo intake limit is of course balanced. As I told you before, we should be able to reach 17.9 RPM. The cooling limit, however, is the thing that's limiting the firing speed. Now, what we can do to add some cooling bonus is actually to increase the number of barrels. If we are having more barrels, we are going to have a much faster cooling limit because we are getting a 2x cooling multiplier with 6 barrels. However, you can see here that we are suddenly 54 millimeters. If we want to have 6 barrels with 150 millimeters, we need to add a lot of more gauge increasers. However, the issue with having multi-barrel is that you can see that the inaccuracy is increased by 0.08 degrees just by being a multi-barrel system. This is of course not fun at all, so for most APS cannons you should only have one barrel. In order to fix the issue on a proper note is going to add more cooling vents. So we're adding a cooling vent here. The cooling limit is at 10, adding another one, it's at 12, adding another one, it's at 14, and here we're getting the weird Tetris. So obviously I probably need at least 2 more. So I'm gonna add 2 more here by replacing the gauge increasers, and then I'm going to place my gauge increasers here instead. Now the cooling limit is at 19 RPM, which means that the rate of fire is secured at 17.9. The really funny thing we can do here is give a tiny boost to the RPM, and that is, if we want to, we can add a ammo intake directly onto the APS firing piece. And if you're only having a cannon that has ammo intakes on the APS firing piece, that is called a diff gun. So we're going to assign this here, and now you can see that the RPM is 18.9. To make pure diff guns, I have other tutorials for that too. Now, we have some issues left on this system. You can see here that we have some inaccuracy here, 0.24. And we got some from recoil. That is not good at all. And the more we fire, the more inaccuracy we get from recoil. On recoil down there, you can see we have 598 per second. But the absorption is only 110. To fix that, we'll need to add some recoil absorbers. Can be attached to cooling vents, for example. And if we add that, we need to make sure that the absorption rate is higher than the recoil. We don't need to add more than that, of course, but it just needs to be just above. And 590 is of course a little bit too little, so it has to be 710 per second to counter the 598 per second that the recoil is generating if this system is firing constantly. So just make sure that the absorption rate is higher than the recoil rate. Then your cannon will be able to fire in full force all along with no problems. Now we have a pretty functional cannon. But what if we want to make this shell speed even faster? What can we do? Well, we can actually add more gunpowder, but there is another way too that we can make this shell faster. And that's by using railgun parts. So, if we have a railgun, we can just add it here on top of the firing piece. And then we go into the APS system, we go to railgun, and we are going to look for maximum energy per shot. The maximum energy we can have per shot is, as you can see down here, 7,156. Keep that number in mind. Now we're going to select how many magnets we need. Each magnet will give you 5,000 energy capacity to the railgun. If we want to have full capacity for each shot, we need to have 2 railgun magnets, because that gives us a capacity of 10,000, and that will be able to cover 7,000, whereas 5,000 would not have been able to cover that. So then we are needing to charge this thing. For that, we need to have railgun chargers. And they are super cool, but they are so expensive. And they're not only expensive like this, oh no, they will cost you energy. So you'll need to make sure that your vehicle is producing battery power, like electrical power, that are stored in the batteries here. And that you can do in many different ways, as I'm sure you know, otherwise refer to my other tutorials. So if we go into the Railgun and we set this to anything above 7156, that will be the max, and we go and check the settings here, then the rail use requires 2137 per second. And while we're covered with the capacity, the recharge rate is not quite there yet. We'll need to make sure it's above 2200 per second. Now we're there. Now we are balanced, we have a proper rail assisted gun. This will make the shell go really fast. But it's usually not a good idea to have full rail support. Rail is pretty expensive to boost the shell with there. And perhaps 2000 energy like that will be enough to make this shot fast enough, which will bring it up with 400 meters per second faster speed than it would have had otherwise. That will also require us to have a lot less railgun chargers, which is going to bring down the cost for this cannon a lot. Like that. Do remember, however, that different shell configurations have different rail draw. So you can't just change the shell midway. You should probably decide the shell before making the cannon. Otherwise, you might get into some big problems, especially when working with rail assist guns. By the way, if you're having a rail assist gun, you can also use that energy to make it more accurate, if you want to. But what if we are actually not wanting to shoot a kinetical shell, but we want to have a interesting little fun chemical shell with frag, EMP and high explosive? Well, this is gonna be real dangerous. So, here we have some scary shells. What will happen if they will, for example, would be shot? Bad things. This issue needs to be fixed. We need to add the EED. Then we'll need to go into each of the autoloaders and we need to add a ammo ejector to each of the autoloaders, just like that. And if we have done that, you can see the little defuse there. In case some evil player would shoot at your ammo, well, it won't blow up anymore. Well, thank me later for not being ammo racked. This is one of the most problematic beginner mistakes in From the Depths that makes people's turrets just go up into smokes and they basically just wasted 100,000 materials on a mistake. So that are the general metrics you'll need to keep in mind when building an APS turret. So now you should have an APS turret that can work independently and shoot at your enemies in different types of ways and in different types of configurations. Stay tuned for our future tutorials, of course. We will be going through how to make some specific APS cannons like sandblasters, probably diff guns, munition defense guns again, some more civs cannons and all that jazz. We have some previous tutorials as well, and you can probably check them out as well if you want to see what that is about. And with that, I will say thanks a lot for you to watch this video. Leave a like and of course subscribe to the channel to catch more videos. If you want to get all my videos with early access, the Ecclesiarchy is down there for you. And if you want to get some very cool perks, the Commissioned Officers is maybe something you want to become in the army of Gmodism. See you next time, and you must check out the Real Exism and the Gmodism channel as well. This is your host Eric of Gmodism, signing out.